All right, I'll record the just so we can have it recorded. Maybe I'll put it up on YouTube. We'll see. All right, so I'm James. I usually run this. I usually host this Laravel meetup. There's also a PHP meetup that happens on the Tampa side of the bridge. There's not been a lot of crossover in terms of attendance there, but if you guys are interested in the other one, I'll probably end up doing whatever talk I give here is what I'll give the PHP meetup because that one's kind of slowed down a bit. Today, Harry and I are going to kind of team up, do a little tag team action of a Laravel API with a Vue SPA, which is something that's tended to be a little bit of a hot topic in the Laravel community lately. A lot of people are like, oh, we have all these resources for like how to build an API, but how do you like build a Vue like a Vue or React single page app in tandem with it? And there are a lot of different architectural decisions that you kind of have to just get behind. And some people don't like making these decisions. They kind of like being told where they can do these things at. So I figured, given the hot topic it is, it makes sense. I suck at Vue and anything JS related, but Harry's a wizard. So I figured it just kind of made sense. So we're going to do like a two-part thing. I'm going to try to spend about 45 minutes going. Today, we're going to be doing all authentication stuff. So creating an account, logging into an account, doing forgot password reset. We're going to do like live coding for that. But if I do get lost, I do have a branch where I can kind of help find my way in case I get lost along the way. And then after we're done doing those 3 or 4 actions, I guess how you want to call it, Harry's going to show us how to do the Vue side of it. So it looks like we're starting all nice and pretty with Vue.js and Vuetify, which is a UI library and all that. But that's not my area of expertise. So we're going to go right over here to the code. And those of you who don't know me, I do everything test-driven. I refuse to do anything without writing a test for it. So the good news is you learn a little bit of Laravel TDD today. So let me just reset to my master branch here. So just to kind of give you guys an update of the 3 parts of this screen, this left side, I have a terminal editor up here. I just use Vim. The top right will be where we run our tests at. Speaking of, I need to do this. Let's try that again. So we'll be running our test up in the top right. And you'll just see the terminal output changing occasionally. I'll try to remind you guys when I run a test because it's out of habit. I just run a keyboard shortcut to run them. And then the bottom right is just artisan serve. It's just an easy way to serve a Laravel application without needing to set up Nginx or Apache or anything of that nature. If the bottom right gets distracting, let me know and I'll throw it away to a different screen. So I prepared today with a couple different branches. The guest Wi-Fi that I'm on here is not necessarily great for doing composer installs because sometimes you have to download a lot of files when you start a new framework. So right now I'm at a place in my commit where if we were to just look at where my master branch is, down here at the bottom, my master branch is all I've done is install Laravel. So all this other stuff is stuff I've prepared in case we need to. But from here, all you need to do to get Laravel with an API is this has everything bare bones working. So a basic route works and whatnot. So if we were to go look at maybe a basic feature test, test feature. So this example test, this will make a GET request to your index route, and then this just asserts that you get a 200 status response code. Pretty straightforward test. But that's all really we have. This is just a base Laravel install. So if you want to do any sort of API authentication and stuff in Laravel, you have a couple different options. Option A is use whatever's provided out of the box from Laravel. All they have without any extra package is just HTTP basic auth, which is where you're sending username and password across, where you normally have to type in, like you get like a little prompt. You guys probably remember the htaccess password things from way back in the day, which is not necessarily ideal, and it's not by far what's standard today. So you can get what's called Laravel Passport, and that's this over here. So Laravel Passport, it's an OAuth server. If you guys have ever done like the login with Facebook workflow, you go to a website, it says log in with Facebook, you click the button, it sends you to Facebook, and it's like, hey, would you like to authorize James's app to access your profile? And it usually gives you a list of fields, and you say yes or no. If you're not already logged into Facebook, it makes you log in. And then after you approve the application, it sends you back to the website you came from, and they do some sort of like authentication and token passing behind the scenes. That's what an OAuth server usually does, but we don't really care to do that this time. We only really care about having JSON web tokens, being able to pass them around. So Passport lets us do 4 different authentication schemes, but we only really are going to care about what's called the password grants, and that's right here. So the password grants are your typical, you have an email and a password and you log in. So I'm going to go ahead and jump forward to another branch where I have Passport installed already through Composer, so we don't have to wait on Composer to install. Okay, and then let's just make another branch. Live code. Okay, so now we're at a point to where we have Passport installed. If I've done let's just follow the installation docs. So basically all I've done is this part here. We're at the branch that I'm at. So PHP Artisan Migrate, who here is actually new to Laravel? Anybody new? Okay. So to catch you up, do you know what database migrations are? So you have like an up and a down, and like you like run your migrations in production. It'll like do your schema changes, like adding columns, dropping columns, so on and so forth. So Laravel out of the box gives you a couple what we're going to call sane defaults, where they'll put like a users table in there for you and stuff like that. You can obviously modify the migration if you want, but Passport is saying like, hey, we have this like migration table you need to run. So when you run this Composer Laravel Passport, it's going to give you another migration. So the first thing you want to do is PHP Artisan Migrate, which I think I'm already good here because I remember I already did this. Yeah, nothing migrate. Oh, so we're going to scroll back down. This is a key thing here, Passport install. So what this will do is this will create records in your database tables for like your OAuth tables. So OAuth tables usually have stuff like clients and secrets and stuff like that for logging in and access tokens. So this will actually do the schema changes and put some records into the table for you. It's probably going to tell me I have this installed. Great, yeah, so I already have it installed. So what this does is it creates these keys. And we need to keep these keys in mind, especially for when we get to Harry's part of the talk, because the client ID and client secret are things that whenever you create an application to authenticate with me, like this is my way of saying you're an authorized application with this ID and secret. So just in case these won't matter because you're on your own setup, right? Like these keys don't matter to you because you're on your own. You're going to use your laptop, right? Yeah. All right, cool. So normally you'd want to write those down and save those somewhere for your own apps if you build an app. So the next step in Passport is there's this trait here, has API tokens, and you'd put this on your user model. So let's just go ahead and do that. We'll go down here, has API tokens. Let's see if we can go ahead and get this automatically pulled in for us. Yeah. So this thing, here's our trait. We're going to put it down here. Why didn't this put? There we go. And this one here. All right. So now we've added this trait here. Okay. Now it says next you should call Passport routes method within the boot method of your auth service provider. So service providers are an area of Laravel that a lot of people start to get a little scared to touch things. In short, you shouldn't be scared of it. Just read the documentation. If you want to do anything outside of controllers, models, jobs, and whatever, you're going to need to learn how service providers work. So the downside to Passport routes is it's going to add all of the routes that you need if you want all of the stuff in Passport. But normally, you don't want all 7 or 8 routes available. You only care about a certain type of tokens, like personal access tokens or password grant tokens, or there's client grant tokens, which is like machine to machine if you have like a CI server that you need to authenticate with your server. So we're going to be a little creative, and we're going to go look to see how this Passport routes method works and injects the routes into the router, and we're going to see if we can only grab the routes that we care about without necessarily just duplicating them. Unfortunately, this way we can do it without duplication, but another thing we're going to do later tonight, we just have to copy and paste the routes, which isn't a big deal. It would just be nice if they're all exposed through a method like this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our route or to our auth service provider, and we're going to grab these routes. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hey, what's up? I think it's starting a little late.
No, it's not a big deal. All you've really missed is I've installed Laravel Passport,
Oh.
and I've put this trait on the model. So we're going to open up our auth service provider. What did it say? Boot method. Yeah, boot method. We're going to grab Passport routes, and I'm going to be lazy and copy and paste because that's what good devs do. And then we got to put the parens there. And of course, we have to import this class up at the top there. So, like I said, this is going to give us a lot of stuff we may not want. So let's step into this function and look at what it's doing. Unfortunately, this one's not too obvious. So I'm just going to go ahead and cheat and show you guys. There's this callback. If you don't define, it's going to just call this all method. So we're going to go down here, this registrar class, and we're going to go to that all. So here you see it's doing authorization routes, access token routes, transient token routes, for client routes, and personal access token routes. So today we're going to be using the password grant tokens. When did you show up? Did you just get here too? Okay. So there are these different types of tokens up here. Like here we have issuing access tokens. You have password grant tokens, implicit grant tokens, client credentials grant tokens, personal access tokens. all we care about today are these password grant tokens, but we're not done quite yet with the routes part. So these are the tokens we care about, which these end up being access tokens. So we're going to step back to where we're in the code. So we want this function. So let's just go ahead and access tokens. So this is pretty simple when you look at it. It's just registering 3 routes, a post, a get, and a delete. So since I care about managing these tokens the way that Passport is managing them, I'm going to see if we can't use this for access tokens function inside of our service provider instead of getting all of the routes, because we saw up there it was calling 4 functions and we only really care about one of them. So if we go back to our Passport class, we can see that if you have a callback, this is the binary operator. Some people don't know about this, where you have the question mark followed by the colon. Most people know about the ternary, have condition, question mark, if true value, and then colon, the falsy value. But if you skip the if true value and you put the question mark and the colon next to each other, then it defaults to whatever's on the left side of that expression. So this is basically saying, if I have a callback function, use it. Otherwise, use this default one here. So I can see here that it's calling the all method. So I'm going to put a callback function on our provider where I call the 4 access tokens function and hope that nothing breaks. And the way that I'm going to test that without having written a test yet is Artisan has a nice little route list command. And so far that works. I imagine if I do something really dumb, it would break. So we're going to go back to our auth service provider, and I'm just going to pass a callback here. And this will be a router. And then maybe do something like router for access tokens. So right now we have, I don't know if you guys can see, but over here we have 2 routes over here. And I'm just going to, did I save that? Yeah. So we're going to run that same command again. And we have a lot more than 2 routes this time. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 routes. And you can see how there's prefix OAuth/token routes in here. Now, something else that I want to point out is you may not necessarily want to expose that this is an OAuth server. Obscurity and security are not the same things. I'm not advocating that. But you may not want the convention of OAuth/ as your prefix. So something else we can do is we can also pass in an array of options here. So let's do prefix. And let's just keep it to auth instead of OAuth. And what happens if we do this? So OAuth changed to auth. Does everybody understand what happened there? Cool. All right. So going back to the installation instructions, we've now done what we care about for the Passport routes, just for the access tokens. Too far. Too far. Okay, so we've done the equivalent of this anyway, but our own way that we wanted to do this. Another thing we have to do is, okay, so in our config auth file, we need to set our driver for the API guard to Passport. That's pretty simple. So we go over here, config auth, look for API down here. So we want this to be Passport. Now we have this migration customization. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds on that one because the default stuff will work out great for us today. Front-end quick start. If you don't have a ninja friend like Harry, then you might care about this front-end quick start. But since he's going to handle all the front-end stuff, I'm not too worried about it. This vendor publish command is common that you'll see with a lot of Laravel packages, whether they're Laravel sponsored packages or third-party, where this vendor publish allows you to create like stub files inside of your package directory that people can then get imported into their project without having to manually copy and paste some files from the repo. And okay, so at this point, we're deploying Passport, which we're not really going to have to deploy it to a server today, but if you did, this would give you some keys to use on that server, just like earlier when I did the Passport install. And now we're done. So there's, for the most part, we're done. If you care about token lifetimes and other things like that, there's a section, but we're going to use all the defaults that they have other than what I've already deviated from and just call it a day. So we can go ahead and commit this. Oh man, I forgot about this. We'll keep ignoring these two because this is for remnants from me testing out Harry's view from earlier, but I don't want to get rid of those because those allow us to serve the SPA on the front end. So we're just going to commit these 2 files here. And we'll just call this like finish setting up Passport. I should have done no verify on that. Okay. So I think now we're at a point to where we can write some sort of test and make sure that we can start talking with the API. I think the easiest one to do at this point would be a login route, because that's like the least amount of setup. You just need a valid user, some tokens, and test to make sure that you get an access token back from the login route. So artisan make test. User can log in to API. Test. This is actually kind of annoying, but if you guys use this test generator command a lot, you have to suffix the end of it with test. It won't do it for you. That's actually something I'm looking about sending a pull request in. To add test. Okay, so user can log in to API test. Oh, we also need to set up our test environment. That's pretty important. I have another branch. No, I don't think I did. Let's just, okay, so e.env database. So for test environment, the way I normally do this is I just set up another database the same exact way I've set this one up. So I'll copy this MySQL thing, and I'll paste it, and I'll just change it to testing. And then I'll change all of the keys in here to like db_testing_host. So let's do this. And let's just hope that that's right. We'll see in a minute. Should probably go ahead and we'll test that first. Go ahead.
I actually had to work through a doozy like that like a week or two ago when I was first starting with Laravel.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty easy thing to get tripped up on because you don't think about it. And then we also want to change the environment variable in our phpunit.xml. We want to change what database connection we're using during our test time. And for now, I'm going to go to our test.
Oh, you got a lowercase n.
Yeah, I'll get to there.
Dude, I did that the other day too. Thanks. Okay, so now we're going to use this refresh database trait. So this refresh database trait does some logic where it'll check to see if you're running a MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL, like a hard disk database or an in-memory database. If you're running an in-memory database, it will run the trait called database migrations, which on every test, it'll roll back and roll forward your migrations, which is great for SQLite databases, but it's really slow for hard disk databases. And for hard disk databases, it'll say, oh, hey, let's just like roll back, roll forward one time at the start of all of our tests, and then we'll use database transactions from that point forward. So that way we're not holding on to any data, and it's kind of like we're simulating running migrations every time. This is kind of like the best of both worlds of the other two migrations they used to have. This was a 5.5 feature, I believe. So if you've used, oh, by the way, Laravel 5.8 came out today, and I'm using 5.7, so it's kind of a bummer. But
5.5 is old news now, right?
Yeah, I know. It's still a year and a half old. So anyway, so this is a really cool feature to have. And what's great about this is when I run this first test, if I get some crap on the top right screen, I'll know that I've not done something with my database config. So just to make sure, I'm going to check my env file, and I still have my database testing environment variables. So we're going to go down here, and I'm going to run this basic test, which, due to this refresh database trait, should run my migrations for me. Okay, nothing errored out. That test passed. That test should pass because it's a pretty simple test. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and commit that real quick. Get status, GA, this guy, and this guy. Okay, now we're going to write a test to post to our login endpoint, and then we're going to try to get a token back. So this get method here does not set any JSON headers, but they have some really cool, they have some cool methods like get JSON, post JSON, all the other HT verbs JSON methods, to where this will set the application JSON header for us. So now we don't necessarily have to care about adding the header on every one of these tests. But if you really wanted to do it the harder way, you could also add an array of headers here. So like authorization or accepts, I guess, in this case, right? But we don't want to do things that way because that's more typing. So the only thing we have to do here is figure out what route we wanted to go to, because these are the passport routes, so we're not defining this ourselves. So let's go back to our route registrar and look at the post. So that's just /token. So we have /auth/token, I believe. We could also verify that here. We're to just run this route list command again. So our post request is here. So you could use the route name or you could use the route path. I'm partial to using paths in my test, just because if I have a path in my test, then I can do that ahead of time. I don't necessarily know what my route name will be ahead of time, especially if it's auto-generated for me. So we'll go back to our test. So we want to make a post request, actually. Post. And that was auth or API /auth token. And actually, no, that was not API prefixed. That was just /auth/token.
Right.
Yeah. I hope that, hey, here, while I'm doing this, can you make sure on my other branch that I didn't prefix it with API?
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
In the test or in the actual notes?
It should be the same because the test passed, which is the good news. Okay, so post JSON, and we're going to need, obviously, some data to post. We're probably going to need a username or an email. Foo, email, bar. And in this case, I'll go ahead and just show us in the docs here that we need to have a grant type. So when you're making a request, this is the kind of stuff that you're going to need. A grant type, the client ID and secret we talked about earlier. And this is, let's just keep looking for that. Here it is. So, and we also need a scope. So it's a bit unfortunate that, like, in this particular case, we don't really care about scope because it's an OAuth specific thing and JSON Web Tokens don't necessarily need them. But because it's only one extra parameter, and for something like a front end, you only have to pass it one time in a function or something, I'm just going to go ahead and include it to make our life easier. But this is a list of the endpoints that we're going to need here. So let's just go ahead and just maybe paste that here. Format that nicely. And just to make our lives easier, I'm going to give it all scopes just so we don't run into any sort of authorization issues like permissions levels. So we just need to set up some IDs and secrets here. James@site.com. Password will be, let's do secret, just because I just happen to know that's what it'll make our life easier in a minute. Secret will be our password. The client ID and secret. So the question is, in a test environment, how do we get this? And the really simple answer is normally whenever you have stuff like a username and password, in order for that to work, in most cases, you need that user to exist on the system. So I'll do that first and then show how we can do the same technique with a client ID and secret. Why is this being user equals factory? Create. And we probably want to give us some overrides like email maybe. That'll be james@site.com. Now, you might want me to pass the password for secret in here. But remember, this is going to be checking the database. So it's going to be wanting, or this will persist a user to the database. And we don't store passwords in plain text. We all know that's a no-no. So instead of passing a password into here, we're just going to go look at the user factory that exists and see what the default password is, which I just happen to know a secret. Because we don't want to, otherwise we'd have to do something like password, hash, make, and then pass secret into here. The bcrypt helper function. Yeah. So like, I just didn't want to get too far into trying to explain all these various encryption things. So we're just going to leave this out. And so it's not even a source of an issue. But if we go to our factory, we can see here, we have a user that the email is some sort of fake or safe email address. It's a verified email account. This is a feature to Laravel 5.5 or 5.6, but we're not going to be using it tonight. And this password here, if I just make this bigger, you can see it. It says on the very end there that it's equal to secret. So I'm just going to trust that they're right and not lying to us. And then our remember token as well, which again, this isn't really valid for us for an API because we're using JWTs to authenticate with the API. So back here, so now we have a valid user and we want to make a post request to this thing. And we probably should use our user-email here. And then we can let that still be secret. And now we need a client ID and a secret. So it's unfortunate we don't already have a client factory for us, but it's not hard to make our own. So let's just go ahead and make our own OAuth client. Equals factory, client, class, create. Now, I should actually need to import these. And this guy, this will be a passport client. So that's 9 on the list. So we can go back over here to the top right and artisan, make, factory, client, OAuth client. factory. The reason I chose the word OAuth is because if we were to look at our schema, you'll see that we have a bunch of OAuth prefixed tables. So I generally like my models and my tables to match up one-to-one just for less confusion. So it's a little weird that it's called client but called OAuth client, but we'll make do with it. So I'll make that factory. And that to get so I can open it up, client factory. So all we care about with that, select all clients. So we care about, it's a shame this is so small. We care about a secret, this personal access client value, the password client value, and the revoked value. That's probably all we care about because we know that if you're not new to Laravel, you know the created at and updated at are automatically added fields for models. The name can be something dumb we don't really care about. So we're going to make sure that we hold on to set the values for these three fields that I'm trying to select here. So I'm just going to make we care that we have a password client. So I'm just going to make it 1 for this guy, 0 for revoked, and 0 for personal access. Secret, just to make our life easier. Personal, again, I cheat. We want 0 for this. 1 for that, and revoked 0. Get rid of that space. So this is pretty straightforward. Now, is anybody familiar with factory states? Okay, I think Brian is. Okay, so we've kind of given this thing like we're calling this particular. Are you familiar with factory states?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're giving this a. We're basically saying that this particular factory here is a personal access client, or a password client. Sorry, and so the idea behind this is it's kind of like you have to read the data to figure out that that's what this thing is. Something else we could do is we could maybe set up, keep it not revoked, and just take these two things out and put them down in what we call a factory state here, like factory state, and then we could do the same class here. I forget the syntax, we could look in a minute, but essentially you would still define a callback with just the fields that make this a password client state. We're going to get rid of that for now just to keep the test moving forward, and then we'll come back and refactor to that in a minute. We have to change our model up here to client, and I think it's the 9th on the list again. Did somebody say something?
Oh.
Okay. So I think this will be enough for our client to work. Let's go back to our test and see where we get hung up on. Oh, we're going to need client ID here, and client secret. So I just want to make sure I get a 200 back, and I'm not feeling too comfortable this is going to pass, but let's see what happens. Yeah, okay, good. I probably just missed something.
So is that how you call your factory state, by the whole factory and you wrap it in the user class stuff?
For the state?
So, yeah.
Okay, so
Like how do you call
particularly,
state?
this is just creating a user factory, like a default user factory. Whatever you see in the user factory is what you're going to get. If you want a specific state, you would go here. That guy, and then you expired user or something. If you wanted an expired user, we don't have any user states or OAuth client states. We'll do that in a second after because it looks like now if you look at this error message, redirect can't have null value, or it doesn't have a default value and it's not nullable. So it's whatever. We'll just go.
It looks
get rid of
like
that.
you're declaring OAuth client there and using.
You're right. Yeah, we're just not getting that far. Thank you. Pop up, come on. There we go. The reason we're not getting that far is because this line's failing. Let's just go back into here. We'll make our redirect. We'll just do that to keep it happy. We're going to rerun that test and see what happens. Okay, so everything's getting created fine now, so we might actually be getting a token back. We might not. There's an exception handler in Laravel that catches stuff and sometimes returns a 200, sometimes returns a 400, sometimes returns a 500. So we're going to inspect our response real quick to make sure we're actually getting token back. And if we are, I'll go ahead and refactor real quick. Response, get content. Okay, so we've successfully hit that route. This is everything we need to actually get a token. We're just not asserting anything yet. I'm going to say that we probably need to make sure we get a bearer token, this token type. We probably want this expires in to not be empty. We probably want access token to not be empty. And there's refresh token hidden right here. It's kind of hard to find, but that's also, we probably don't want that to be empty. And I think that's the bulk of our API response, at least that somebody like Harry or whoever our client developer would care about making sure that we always return. So that way, if we ever change anything, we'll know if it broke or not. Okay, so let's assert equals bearer, right? And we want our JSON token type. What? So let's comment this out and make sure that still passes. We should have 2 assertions now. Great. And I think I want 3 not empties. We'll just and that was token. Access token, refresh token expires in. What's up?
Is there a reason you use these instead of the JSON assertions, like assert JSON fragment and things like that? Do you not prefer?
Okay, so for these particular cases, I already need. So if I would not be doing the first assertion, like assert equals, I would care. But the problem with JSON fragment is you can't do check the keys exist in some cases, and then only check that. Like in this case up here, this first assertion, I care about a key and a value. Right. These 3, I just care that they're not empty.
Okay.
Right. So if I were doing something like assert JSON structure, which the problem is that would also, if these were set to null in the JSON return, that wouldn't make it obvious to me. The test would still pass.
Oh, it would. Okay.
Yeah. I write the strictest test possible, which leads to a lot of fragile tests sometimes. But I go as strict as I can, and as the tests become fragile, I back it up.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if it's a fragile test that just never breaks, then who cares? It's a good test. Right. So in this particular case, I want to make sure that I'm getting a value for expires, access token, and refresh token. And I want to make sure the token type is bearer. Because these are all things that like Harry has to care about when he makes his view client. And I'm actually running quickly out of time. So I might have to switch to another branch and just start explaining stuff because we're already at 40 minutes in. So, and not empty, you don't have 2 params. So let's just do that. And, oh, how'd I miss that? And
The one above that.
yeah, it's access token, and this is refresh token. And I'm weird. I like this to be in the same order. We should have 5 assertions. Yeah. Okay. So does this test not make sense to anybody? Any questions about this particular test? Okay, cool. So I mentioned we can get rid of this stray DD up here. So I mentioned this factory state a minute ago. So let's just say we want this state to be a password client. So this test will now blow up because we don't have that factory state defined. We're unable to locate password state for a password client. So let's go back to our client factory and let's add a state. I'm gonna have to go over here to our testing stuff. I don't remember the syntax off the top of my head. Database. Factory states. Okay, so let's call back the same. Okay, so we can just basically take this guy. We'll call it defined a state. And we care about this one being 0, this one being 1, and revoked. We're just going to pretend that all of our things are not revoked unless we create a revoked state. So this will now create our password or our client state, and we're still getting an issue here. 2 arguments passed in. What I miss?
State name.
Yes, thank you. Password, right, is what we called this?
Yeah.
Okay, run that again. Okay, and the test still passes. So it's pretty straightforward. You add the 3rd parameter here for the state, the things that make it that state, and then you just call the state off the same factory method. So I think that makes sense to everybody, right? Okay. And notice how we actually didn't implement this route at all, because remember, this is a passport route. We don't really care how passport works. We just care that it does, because it's a framework provided feature. So I'm going to go ahead and commit this. And tests. I'll just keep these commit messages nice and short. Note that I don't normally do that week of commit messages. So next we're going to do our registration stuff. Because we're running short on time, I'm going to jump to that other branch. A lot of the stuff is going to stay the same here, where we just create a user or a client, and we send a request, and we're going to assert some stuff at the bottom. So jumping around to different branches shouldn't be too bad anyway. Feature auth-complete. Okay, let's just reset this. User can register test. Okay, so we're going to ignore this setup for a minute. Actually, no, we can't, because I already refactored this. So in this particular setup, if you ever have a test setup function, always call the parent setup function. You'll get some really weird results. If you don't, same goes for teardown. I typically like to do it like this, where I call the parent setup before my stuff, and then I do my stuff. If for whatever reason you were to modify stuff, and this setup would also modify, then you would have unexpected results because the parent setup would change it, and you thought you'd change it a certain way. So I always do their setup first, and I do their teardown last. So all my stuff happens kind of sandwiched in the middle there. So user can register. So we have a route, which is our API register route. We have a name, email, password confirmation. And then here's our same OAuth fields, which, again, this is not necessarily the greatest, but like this is abstracted away from at least the user. Like if you were to inspect the form in Chrome, you wouldn't see these three fields here. You could just pass those on to whatever the function is that makes the request. Like the user would never really know about this. So we want to make sure that we get a 201 status. Again, we're doing our same JSON thing here. We want to make sure we get our token back. So this basically says, like, after we registered, we're now logged in because we're getting a token back. And then we're making sure we have a valid user down here where my password is set to secret. So notice I'm calling auth-attempt. This is just a way of checking, make sure the email password combination works. And here's the email that I used for this. We're going to run this one function. This function passes. Now I'd like to step into the route, the API register route. So we go to routes API. So I'm using a route group here. Anything inside this API file is prefixed with /API/. So notice down here I don't have that prefix here. That's just something that Laravel gives us to us. Anything inside this file gets that prefix. So register controller at register. So let's go to register controller. If I could type, that'd be better. Register. How many people here have actually used the Laravel make auth stuff before? Okay, just one, two?
No.
Okay.
Can I get a quick question? Are you passing the client secret from your view app?
The view app will get that client secret, and it will make the request to the endpoint. You all right?
No, I mean, generally, you really shouldn't be putting your client, giving out your client secret into a JS app, though.
No, but this is for an OAuth app. Like that client secret authenticates with me, with my server, saying like, "Hey, I'm this authorized application." This is not the same as the access token you get for me to post on your Facebook wall. That's not the same secret.
Yeah, but I mean, I understand using, if you already got Passport, go ahead and just use it to issue the JS
Sure.
ticket,
Mm-hmm.
right? But normally in this situation, you would just call a basically just like a normal login, give your name,
username, password,
email, password. It would hit a route, and then that route, you would basically just take it and call the auth, adding in server side what your client secret is.
Well, no, because I don't know what app he's using to connect to me with. That's the thing. Like that client ID at the very least is saying this is the app. Like say we had a mobile app.
But on password grant, the front end is going to have to pass the client secret.
Yes, and the ID.
But you don't want to do that.
No, that's fine. That part's fine.
That's funny because you're usually much more on the security and stuff than I am.
No.
It's kind of like a role
So
reversal.
the difference is this client ID secret is for his app to authenticate with me. This is not for the user to authenticate with me, right? So the way it's like, have you ever made an OAuth app with like Imager?
I mean, I'm not really going to hit on anybody because I think that's like whatever your policy and your situation is, you can assess the risk yourselves. But I mean, generally speaking, when you do this, I mean, I have security auditors hit me all the time on this.
Well, I'm not. When Harry and I were talking about this, I was not cracked up on sending these because I'm like, all I really care about is getting a token with a username and email.
Yeah.
So my options were, one, if I want to use anything provided to me from Laravel to not drag this on even longer, it was either going to be pass in those two fields, and the scope and grant type, which to me, they're just completely irrelevant to him. Like he doesn't need to know that. right? Or I could create a personal access token with that trait that we did earlier in the beginning where on the user model, it has a create token function, but that's a personal access token.
But afterwards, I'm going to show you a cool way that I made it really quick and easy and made everybody happy with that. You might want to see that.
Dude, I'd be fine with it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not happy with like him knowing, like he doesn't need to know this is an OAuth implementation.
Yeah.
But just know that any OAuth implementation and you make a request to authenticate with an OAuth server, you do need those fields. That's OAuth spec.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've built it OAuth servers, but like I said, let's not derail it. But I'm going to show you how to handle that because it's a real.
If there's a really cool way to handle it, I'd love to.
It's a really simple way to handle it.
Either way, like what I could do is I could just take that away and say, look, you just need to pass this, and I'll just supplement every request. Like I could create a middleware that just adds in like me, like that client ID that they create on the Passport install. I could just have a middleware that just adds those fields to the request that just uses like that. All right. Anyway, so back on topic. So the make auth stuff, Laravel for a long time has provided a artisan make auth command, which gives you a login controller and a registration control and all these other things. The only problem is they're great if you're building a standardized, server-side rendered web app. We're not doing that today. We're doing this SPA goodness stuff. So we had to look at a way to try to use this same stuff, but not redo it all ourselves. So this function actually doesn't exist. Whoa. This function actually doesn't exist on this controller. I've overridden it from this trait that's up here that's actually, I don't use it anymore because it only provides that once. So there's a registers users trait, which actually you can see it imported right here. So this trait, if we go into it, you'll see this actually has that same register function. The problem is we don't want this because this by default redirects a user. And again, that's great for a web app. That's terrible for an API. If we were to use the login stuff, it's actually much nicer. And they've actually broken a lot of stuff down to like, okay, like this is step 1, this is step 2, step 3. You can override any one of those steps in the chain. So for the login stuff, it's a lot easier to return API response. So let's go back to this register controller. So this register function, this is again, this is all Laravel stuff right here. I added this merge username thing. So going back to this OAuth thing, this is what's really frustrating. For Passport, they want a username key instead of an email key. Frustrating, whatever, I'll get over it. So instead of having Harry write this, I just merged that into our request and just got over it. So then we have this issue token function that it's defined down here, but it's also defined in that other trait. This is all Laravel stuff that we don't care about. I just need to bring this in here so that I could modify this response on the way out. Because if you issue a token, it gives you a 200 back instead of a 201. That's probably something to do with OAuth spec that I don't really care about. All I know is it makes it weird. When I create a user entity in my database or through an API endpoint, I like that response to be a 201 created. So here, basically, if my token response is 200, then I just reset that to 201 and I return it back. And this is the same thing that the login will do when you get the response fields, which is why I have that same assertion. User can register test. Which is why we have these same assertions. Any questions about that? Do you want me to go through those lines of code a little more specifically? Because the only one thing I changed was the request merge and the return a token. Everything else is default Laravel stuff. You can go into that trait yourself and see what it's like, the validation and all that other stuff. So a note on that validation stuff. I'm going to wrap this up in 10 minutes regardless of how far I get, all right? Okay.
James, question on the double equals for the get status code, double equals 200. Do you normally do that, or is it triple equals, or any reason why you do double equals?
So Minky's not here, so we're not going to do the strongly typed boxing glove stuff today, because here's the fact of the matter: string 200 and 200 integer.
I feel pretty strongly.
They work out great together. Now, if you give me 200A, that still goes to 200. If you give me 200 a whole string, it still goes to 200 because of PHP's type juggling rules. To me, if you wrote triple equals here, I wouldn't tell you not to. Yeah. But to harp on me for not doing it, you're probably going to get a big middle finger. So, because in this case, it doesn't actually matter. There are some cases where strong typing matters. This is not one of those cases. And here's the best part.
But get status code will always equal integer 200, right?
And here's the best part.
Triple equals
this particular status code came from a PSR7 HTTP response. PSR7, if you guys haven't followed the whole PHP Fig thing, they've got all these different interfaces they have defined. Since it's PSR7, they've made on their interface for the status code to return an integer. So I know for a fact it's going to be an integer in this case. I just don't care. Like, not putting triple equals here doesn't harm it anyway because it's going to come back as an integer anyway. So we could argue about it, but it's not really going to get us anywhere. So this validator. Go ahead.
Can you just add in one more equals real quick? No, I'm just kidding.
Hey, do me a favor. Can you please? Can you like mirror me real quick? Go like this. Go like this. Go like this. So we have this request validate. This function used to be macroed all the time in older versions of Laravel. 5.4 or 5.5 made it an actual request function. This will create a validator given the rules that you give it. And in this case, it's this validator here. And these rules that you give it, let's just look for validator. So here are our validation rules, name, email, and password. So you can read these. These are standard Laravel validation things. But the idea here is if this validator fails, let me go back. Whoops. So if this validator fails, it's going to throw an exception, which is kind of blind to us because by the time it bubbles all the way back out to the web server and it sends a response, it's not a 500 anymore with the stack trace. It actually turns into a 422 response with a list of validation errors and messages. This is something that the Laravel's default exception handler will handle right for us, so we don't really care. And the nice part about it is when you have a collection, which in this case you have your validation message error bag or whatever, it will turn a collection into a JSON response for you as well. So there's a lot of niceties built around the validator, so you don't really care. And a lot of things, if they throw an exception, you don't really need to care about if your exception handler deals with it for you. So in this case, if we want to do some validation tests, I've already wired those up too. And so in this case, we have these fields are required to register. And here, you'll see that here's a JSON error for you. I want to see an error for these 3 fields if I don't pass anything into my post request up here. So if my post request has no data, these are the only 3 things I want from the validator because those are the rules that the registration controller itself put validation against. Now here's the kicker. There's also like the client ID, secret, grant type, and scope. Why are those not in here? The simple solution is I can put those in the validation rules and be fine. But the problem is now my login controller and my registration controller will deviate based off the responses with the OAuth getting implemented in there. So I should also change the login controller validator if I'm going to do that. And I'm actually thinking about pull requesting that into Passport as well because I think it's kind of silly that they don't. Because like the OAuth server that this is using is a PHP leak package, and it doesn't do the validation for you. I mean, it does, but it returns it through like exceptions and stuff the same way Laravel does. So we're going to ignore the OAuth stuff for now because the response is a little bit different. So this little pattern is one that I've kind of adopted and liked. Just have a valid params function that I can pass an overrides array to. And that will allow me to have like, here's some like params that I know are good. And then for like a validation test, I'll just make a post request. I'll merge my valid params with like the data that I want. I'll assert a 422, and I'll assert I get validation errors with the given keys that I pass into the function here. So this looks like I've probably abstracted out too much, but this is only because this allows me to do a really cool function like this. Name must be string. I pass a name key with a value of a number, and it's a 1-line test. And as long as you care about what these things do, you don't have to worry about copying and pasting the same 3 or 4 lines over all the time. So we'll see that this one passes. In other words, I have a JSON validation error. I'll just go ahead and save you guys the trouble, run the whole file, you see the whole thing pass. And we'll just go down these test names together maybe. So I have name must not be greater than 255 characters. Password must be a string. Password must match the confirmation. Password must not be less than 6 characters. Then we have our OAuth stuff. Where did it go? Grant type. Screw this. Let's go back down here. Valid OAuth params. So then here we have user cannot register without a valid grant type. So in this case, like if I pass an empty grant type, it's going to give me this key. Again, this is a PHP League OAuth server error that we're getting back. Laravel's not handling this for us differently, which again, I feel like it could. And we could totally right now, but in terms of time's sake, we're not going to do it. But to show you where that would go, if you go back into here and you go to that validator function, like we could add a grant type here and do required. And if we were to run that same file, this test will fail because it'll be a different type of response. Grant type. See how we're getting a 400, but it wanted a 422? So this 422 is Laravel doing the validation for us instead of the OAuth server provided from PHP League. So because that changes the response, and I'm not a big fan of that in terms of how it will mess up Harry, I wanted to keep these 3 things default. User cannot register without a valid client ID. Again, that's the same thing, and we're going to assert the status code. We're going to look for this in the request and this in the request as well. Does all of this make sense, these validation errors and stuff? Okay. The last thing I'm going to show real quickly since Harry's out is we also have a forgot password link. Pretty typical, like you put in your email, send a post request, you click the email or whatever. Recover. Oh boy, what did I name that? Test feature.
I actually need to build one of these really soon, so that's good.
Oh, the password stuff?
In Laravel.
So Laravel gives it to you for free if you don't use an SPA. But if you do want to do the whole viewer,
using SPA,
yeah. So if you want to do the React thing, you can just copy this code. So here, like a guest. So I name all. If you guys notice, I name my test kind of weird. Like this is not like a login controller test or register controller test. I used to do that and I stopped doing it because at some point you have like a really long test file with all the things the controller can do. When you start having like 10 and 12 validations on big forms, the controller thing gets really big. So I started naming each test after like an action, like guest can recover password test kind of thing.
Hey, quick question. Is there an OAuth test in there? I thought I saw something that said like OAuth test.
In register and login there were, yeah.
And the parameters, like you were setting equals to empty array and then you're returning array merge.
Yeah, let's go back to that.
Just quick question as to...
This is the same thing as my other valid params thing, but yeah, go ahead.
Quick question as to why you're setting that as the default params and then merging it in and returning it rather than just setting return overrides equals and then putting the params in there.
So I want
returning.
So these are like my default parameters that I know will pass validation.
Yeah.
And in my particular validation test, I want to say like, hey, this is the only validation error I want. Because the problem is, if you were to have a bunch of invalid request keys, you don't necessarily know which order it's going to come back in. I mean, you could argue it's going to be in the order that's defined in the validator, but the test shouldn't know how like if I switch two keys in the validator, I don't want the test to fail. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, this is the easiest way to say like, I'm only going to get one validation error, and that's because this thing is not passed in, right? But if it was passed in and it was not a string, it'd be like, oh, the one error you have in this case is it's not a string. So this is my way of saying all of my other parameters are valid. This is equivalent of you filling out an HTML form with all valid parameters and changing the one field you want to be wrong. Make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So
I'll talk to you more about that later.
Okay. Yeah. We can go in depth, do an exercise with it or something. Screen share. So again, so a guest can send a password forgot email, right? Backwards those, whatever. So again, we need to create a user here, and we're going to go just send a post request to this endpoint API password email. That'll be my email address. I want to make sure I get a 200. And here's kind of the weird thing: assert sent to with notification. Notification is a facade in Laravel. There's all sorts of notification channels. There are email notifications, SMS notifications, Slack. There's a whole list of them. And the SMS notifications go deep. You can, like Nextmo's by default, but you can throw in a Twilio adapter and Amazon SMS. There's a slew of things you can do with the Laravel notifications. There's also a mail function or a mail facade that you could do the same thing with. But if you send an email with notification, the mail facade actually won't get triggered because it's not the same class sending the email. So in this particular case, how the built-in user registration stuff works is it sends a notification rather than it sends an email through notification, not through the mailables themselves. So we're just going to come up here. We're going to fake it. We're going to make our request, make sure we get a 200, and then assert sent to. We want it to go to that user, obviously, and we want it to be this notification class, the notification we want sent to the user. We'll see that this passes, and we'll go take a look into this real quick. API. So here's our post to the password email. And this forgot password controller, again, this is one of those provided for us controllers. And again, here we have a trait where all of the work is done for us here. And I added this function here. This would look like that. But because, again, I want to change that response, notice how the only function I had to modify this time is a one-line function, and that's the send reset link response. So if we get a valid response, I want this to happen instead of a redirect. This is what I meant, how the register, I had to copy the whole register function and change the one line at the bottom. But if we were to go up into this trait and actually go into the send reset link email where the work is happening, you'll see that it validates it. And then it does this, okay, if the response is whatever that constant value is, then we're going to do this. Otherwise, we'll do this. This particular case, because it's an exception, the exception will check to see if we're sending an application JSON header. If we are, it turns into JSON. So this thing works out great if we want it to be JSON. But the success response ends up being a redirection response, which is obviously not what we want. So I just had to rewrite that one function. So instead of doing a redirect here, I just did a JSON response. Back to our test. And then we have a guest can reset our password. Again, we create a user. In this case, I need to create like a token to reset our password with. So again, password is a facade. These kind of get a mixed review. If anybody saw my talk, Laravel for the PH purist, I talked about why I don't think facades are such a bad thing. And in fact, I think in tests they're a godsend. Because like if I were to do this the other way, I'd have to do something like this app instance, whatever my password broker is, and then I'd have to like bind it to something. So like my fake password broker, and like then I have to go figure out like what this thing is, and it's just easier to use the facade to do the work for us. So again, we send our post response with like our token, our email, our secret, and our secret confirmation. Again, we want to make sure we get a 200. Again, I want to make sure that password got set to the right thing. Let's wrap that so you can see it's actually equal to secret 2. There we go, secret 2. Again, this is me just taking the class, changing that one response method instead of copying and pasting that whole function, which is really nice that you can just change the one method at the end, and that gives you, it delegates control to you that way. And all of the stuff in the app directory like this is actually meant for you to change anyway. So like if I really want to, I could redefine all those functions in here, but to me it's, why do that when I have to do this? And there's also resets password controller. And again, here you see all I changed in here was that send response, again, JSON. That's all I had to change to make this work with an API, which that's a win in my opinion. Any questions about this? Okay. If we have time and you guys want to know how I figured out how to get into this, I did it the same way as I'll show it real quick. If we go to, if you do the make auth command over here, artisan make auth. If I were to, I'm not going to hit enter here because it'll be bad for me. But if I were to, what would end up happening, if you go to your routes web, this would be the equivalent of doing something like auth routes like this. And the reason why this is a little bit subpar in our case is because this would register all of the auth routes, and they would be, again, server-side rendered routes, not API routes. So in this case, we're going to go to this function definition. So this is the auth facade. And again, if you're here for that talk last time, this routes function may or may not exist on the facade itself. We're going to see if we can get lucky. In this case, we are lucky. You can see up here the green facades and auth, or up here on this class. So in this case, routes, all it does is it grabs our router, and it calls this auth function. So let's go to our router, route, and look for the auth function. So if we go here, we can see here's all of our authentication routes as well. So that's how I figured out like what controller to call in my routes. Only 2 more points before I get out of here that I almost forgot to show you. So we have our password reset token route. It's kind of silly that I'm redefining the route if I don't need it. Because I could have just called that auth routes. But the thing is, I really only want 2 routes here. And all of these routes are going to be delegated onto the single page app anyway to Harry's view stuff. In this particular case, I only need this route so I can have a route name of password.reset because our reset email password actually calls that route name. So I need it defined. If I wasn't using any of Laravel's pre-built auth stuff, I would only need the single route. This is a catch-all route where I have an any parameter. So this could be foo, bar, Baz, James, David, Chris, whatever, or empty. It can only be empty because my regex here is .star. If this were .plus, I would have to have something there. But the idea here is that this route will catch any route and send it on to this blade file SPA client. SPA client is pretty simple. I just do a standard PHP include. This is a blade directive that will open up PHP tags for us, and I just include our dist index.html. This is something that Harry will build for us later. I already have that on my server, so this is our index.html now. But the idea is like now Laravel is actually serving this template up for us, and we don't have to do any sort of weird like web server configuration tricks or hacks or anything. So Laravel is actually serving this for us through a proxy almost. Now, if I were to turn this into .plus instead, this should give me a 404 of some sort. Yeah. And the reason why is because I don't have anything at the top. If I were to put something like F, now I have it again. I don't know why that HTML just changed. Oh, it's because I should have refreshed. Anyway, you guys get the idea. If I don't have anything here, the other way to do that, if I wanted to catch all, is I can make this optional via a question mark. But since this is a catch-all route, like it's not such a big deal. See, now it's not 404ing again. But since it's a catch-all route and I want to catch everything, the asterisk is just standard regex, 0 or more versus plus being 1 or more. Questions real quick. Where did Harry go? All right, I'll wait on Harry. Any questions?
I'll check them now because I need some coffee.
All right. No questions at all? It kind of moves really fast.
Why we have any questions?
They all come for Harry, so they were just really waiting on you to get done.
I know. He's better looking than I am. He can't fight as good as me, though. I'm going to just go ahead and claim that. And if he wants to prove me wrong, we can find out. You too? I'm just, no.
He doesn't have your hair pulling tactics and such. But
All about the choke, man. You got to wrap up. It's like an anaconda. Yeah, I moved really fast because we're running out of time. I was afraid of that. Really no questions? Or is it really because we moved too fast that we don't have questions, or it all makes sense?
It makes sense.
Okay.
Makes sense until you try.
Like if you read the test, does the test make sense? The important part is the test makes sense. Right? Because then as long as you make the test pass, who gives a shit? Really, right? Right. What was that?
I was trying to install Laravel example blog thing just because while you were talking, I was just trying to set up the basic project, and I had an issue because for whatever reason,
Wi-Fi here?
Composer 1.2.
Oh, okay. So, did you use the Laravel installer or Composer Create project?
I used Composer Create project.
Cool. All right. So if you were to do it, you'll actually have a different version than me because 5.8 just came out today.
Yeah.
So I was really tempted to see if I could upgrade this while I was at home, but I was like, you know what, this thing's working. I was like, dude, it's such a simple enough change. All right. You ready, Harry? Yeah. Nobody had any questions. They all said I sucked, so it's all you to make this better. You got to make it good.
it's a pretty easy fact to actually follow there. Don't worry. I love you, buddy.
Will this be up as a repo on GitHub? Or
It already is.
Oh, it is. Okay, great. Sorry, I missed that.
I didn't say that.